We talked about Wemby. Now it's time to move on and discuss Scoot Henderson, plus the player recaps. Dennis Smith Jr. up today, all on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
We're Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. There it is. It's a good. Is this a silly dance or is this a very serious dance?
None of my dances are silly. They're completely serious. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that's Doug Branson.
They're not silly moves. This is silly season, but these moves are serious.
Let's just have a complete breakdown in the normal confines of what a usual intro is.
That's breakdown.
Doug Branson. Doug Branson. Go to his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. All sorts of great little nuggets there. And you can listen to me, Sports Radio 92.7 WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3. Make sure you make us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods, and that does include YouTube, where if you watch, then you can see Doug's very serious stance for yourself. DSJ is up on the docket today. Very excited about DSJ. One of the better stories in all of the NBA. He was very fun for like the national headline guys that would write, okay, this is an underrated story you're not paying attention to. Dennis Smith Jr., former lottery pick, someone that was very celebrated coming out of NC State as this guy that was this combo guard, really athletic, a lot of fun, and then got traded in the Porzingis trade to the Knicks, and then has since tried to find his way once again, all while being still very young. The guy's 25 years old, so still a young basketball player, but yet comes here very late in the offseason, Doug. Doesn't come over to the Charlotte Hornets organization until September, where he wowed Steve Clifford, DSJ, developed a very good relationship. And honestly, I think he rectified his career. He's going to get a contract somewhere. It might be with the Charlotte Hornets. If Mark Williams is positive storyline number one, DSJ is positive storyline this year number two, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And he not only came in September, it was late September. Only Teo Maledon beat him, in that category. But Teo was signed like middle of October, right before the season. So the Hornets really, they were playing the whole backup point guard position pretty risky, right down to the end, and betting on a couple of guys that could have gone. It could have gone either way. I mean, Dennis Smith Jr. has spent a vast majority of his career injured, and there weren't a lot of teams willing to bet on him. The Hornets were one. You had the local connection, of course. He grew up in Fayetteville and went to NC State, so you've got all of that going on. But he comes in, he works hard, and he was an absolute force on the defensive end. He offers, I think, two things that the Hornets desperately need. Even with him, they still need to add players like this that have these two qualities. One, they can lock down their guy on the defensive end, and they can, not just steal the basketball, not just hop into passing lanes, which Dennis Smith Jr. can do, but he can also keep you from getting to the basket. He can frustrate you. He can get into your head. The other thing is, I look back on those games that he played against Dallas late in the season, and, he was saying after those games that, hey, we put their bleep in the dirt, and he played like a two. And when he drove to the rim, you felt the emotion that he was playing with. You felt that just sense of urgency, like, hey, I almost lost my entire career, and these people cast me off, and now I'm going to show them what's what. He plays with a passion and an energy and an intensity and a ferocity that I would say is a little lacking, just across the board on this team. They don't have a lot of guys like that, and it's a special quality. Not everyone has it. Not everyone has that dog in them, as they say. But Dennis Smith Jr. definitely does, and he showed it.
No, he did. Now, if you want to do the whole cleaning the glass thing, the page is very blue on offense, and it's very orange on defense when you look at the on-off numbers. For those that don't know, the blue is bad, and the orange is good. The bluer it is, the worse the percentile.
The more you blew it.
Positive. Yeah. It's just, we can understand being blue there with the stats, and the more orange it is, the higher percentile you have achieved with some of the positive stats there. So Doug, offensively, 19th percentile when he's on the floor, points per possession for the Hornets, 25th effective field goal percentage. When you go to the defensive side, the Hornets were allowing 10, almost 11, excuse me. They were almost allowing 11 points fewer per 100 possessions with him on the floor to
That's
the opposing
crazy.
offense.
That's a big number.
99th percentile effective field goal percentage was down for the opposing offense when he was on the floor. 6.3%, 100. Best mark that you could get, 100th percentile. It's crazy. The defensive impact was great. The question is, right? You and I both agree. We would both like to see DSJ back in a Hornets uniform. Price is always the caveat when discussing, do you want to bring back a free agent? Don't think he's going to make that much money, though. So if it's something like vet min type of deal, maybe a little more, I don't know what the deal is. Like the range on him is interesting. But can you stomach the offense that is bad with the team not playing well, with him being that guard, that combo point guard, whatever? Can you stomach that because he does bring such fantastic defense on the other side?
I think you absolutely have to. I've said this a couple of times, but if you missed those episodes, I think if they don't make a really concerted effort to bring Dennis Smith Jr. back on some contract that we can all agree is reasonable, some other team can come in and say, no, actually, we saw what he did. We believe he can stay healthy, and we're going to give him a big old honking deal. Then, okay, I get that. I get if the Hornets don't want to, overpay.
Yeah.
Okay. But they have to make a reasonable effort to bring this guy back. And if they don't, then they're not serious about winning. Dennis Smith Jr. plays at a position that the Hornets need. I mean, backup point guard is not an area where they've been strong, not just this season, but in seasons past. That they have not had, a super solid backup for LaMelo to depend upon. And so I think they absolutely need to do everything they can to bring Dennis Smith Jr. back. They also... It's about money, but it's also about roster spots at this point too, right? I mean, they've got a lot of draft picks that they're invested in right now. They've got a couple of draft picks that they may make out of 5 that they've got available in this next draft. If they land in the 2 spot, we're talking Scoot. They're going scooting, maybe, or maybe they go Brandon Miller. I don't know. But if they go scooting, that's just another guard that you've got to really work in pretty immediately. And so, all of those factors are going to play into this. But I really feel like Dennis Smith Jr. offers a lot of things that the Hornets really, really need. And if they want to stick with Steve Clifford as the coach, then I think it's a perfect fit, and they ought to go out and make him an offer.
Steve is certainly going to want him. All right, you brought him up. You brought up Scootin'. Let's do that coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
We continue our series with Doug Branson, speaking with Rafael Barlow, host of the NBA Big Board podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. They spoke about Scoot Henderson and this clip. That is still to come, so don't you go anywhere. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits just right the first time around. All you have to do is add your ride to the My Garage tab and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, get the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Here's some conversation between Doug and Rafael Barlow about Scoot Henderson.
Welcome back to the Locked On Hornets podcast. I've got my draft cap back on, and you know what that means. We've got Rafael Barlow from the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast here to talk more about these opportunities for the Hornets in this upcoming draft. We're going to move on to number 2 overall, and I'm going to zero in here on Scoot Henderson. I don't know if he's going to be the consensus number 2 pick by the time this is all said and done, but for a while there, it seemed like he was locked in. I heard a lot of people saying, in any other draft that didn't feature Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson would be a number 1 overall pick. What say you, Rafael? What do you think about Scoot Henderson at number 2?
Yeah, I like Scoot a lot. I think that he had a tremendous buzz last year, and that's when you started to hear the rumors that he could possibly challenge Victor. And then they met heads up in Las Vegas, and they both had monster games the first night. And then Scoot got injured, and he didn't get a chance to play the second game. And then I think what kind of made his name kind of fall off is that he just did not have a very good second half of the season. Started off on fire, but I think he had like 25 points or more in like 5 of his first 6 games. But he finished the second half of the season kind of sputtering, 39% from the floor, 27% from 3, while Brandon Miller was having big games before the NCAA tournament, but he's having big games on TV against SEC competition, even though a lot of people may figure the G League competition is better, which it is. But in college basketball, you're playing for something, whether it's the SEC tournament, NCAA tournament, and so on. While in the G League, you're not playing in the biggest crowds. You're not necessarily playing to win. A lot of guys are playing to get called up. And then in the second half of the season, guys are starting to realize that it's unlikely that they'll get called up. So with all that being said, with Scoot's, not strong second half of the season, I think that opened the door for there to be some fluidity about who could be the second pick. But overall, I mean, he's a tremendous talent. Probably the best point guard prospect that we've had in years. I mean, he's drawn comparisons to Derrick Rose. I can make a case and say he's a better shooter than Rose at the same stage, just doesn't have that extra gear like D Rose had. But again, who has? Westbrook. So I think Scoot is a phenomenal prospect.
Okay, but I'm looking at this list of players on Tankathon's NBA mock draft, and I'm seeing a lot of 6'4", a lot of 6'5", 6'6", and then you look at Scoot, and he's listed at 6'2". Now, why should I not be scared by the fact that you're drafting a guy who's 6'2", second overall?
I think it's the flavor of the month to go bigger, but I think you'd be making a mistake if you let Scoot fall past maybe number 3. Again, we're talking about a guy that was 17 years old playing in the G League. Some people feel like the G League is the second best league in the world. Even if you have it third behind the Euro League, he was 17 years old. He was playing, averaging about 14 points per game. Great athlete, can pass the ball, good pull-up shooter. And I think he is a guy that can be your franchise point guard. But for Charlotte, you don't necessarily need a franchise point guard right now because you already have one in LaMelo Ball.
I know he said in some interviews that he likes the idea of playing in a 2-guard lineup, very similar to what Portland had with C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard. And that would be a similar situation, I suppose, if he were to be drafted by the Hornets and started immediately, because he would be starting alongside LaMelo Ball. You and I talked about the awkward situation where you would have Victor and Mark Williams playing, and if that would work. So I'll ask you the same sort of flavor of question here. Would a Scoot Henderson, LaMelo Ball backcourt work in your mind?
Excuse me. I would not be a fan of it simply because I think both guys are both really, really good with the ball in their hands. And I think if you take the ball out of Scoot's hands or you take it out of LaMelo's hands, then you're not maximizing their gifts. I think it can work. I would have some concerns about the outside shooting. Scoot did not shoot the ball efficiently from deep this year, even though he showed strides at the beginning of the season, but the numbers kind of dipped, like I said, in the second half of the season. I mean, I would try it to see if it works, but long term, I don't know if it is the best fit.
All right, that's Rafael Barlow. Make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast as we get closer to the NBA draft. We're going to have Rafael back to talk about some of the other prospects that the Hornets could take 1 through 8. We don't know where they're going to land. Maybe they go 1, maybe they go 8. We'll find out about all of these players coming up. Thank you, Rafael.
Thanks to Rafael once again. We'll have a few of those draft segments sprinkled in through some of these segments that we're doing this week. We'll give you our thoughts on Scoot Henderson and more DSJ talk coming up in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. So really, any trip you take, Ibotta has you covered. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop, and you can get your cash back. It's that easy. The average Ibotta user actually earns $120 a year in real cash back. So that's nice. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, Ibotta, Ibotta in the Google Play or App Store. and use code LOCKED, LOCKED. Scoot Henderson, DSJ, coming up next in the last segment. Doug, good stuff there once again. Now we've talked Wemby, the number 1 overall prospect. Scoot Henderson now today, really still most likely the number 2 overall prospect, even though some may care to differ, but still mostly that. I love him. I know you are a big fan of Scoot Henderson, and I know you asked Rafael about the size. He did not think the size was a concern. He did think maybe playing with LaMelo might be a concern for him. What did you make of some of the things that Rafael Barlow had to say?
I mean, I get where he's coming from. To have 2 guards that do need the ball a lot to make things happen can be difficult. But I think they are enough different in how they use the basketball that I think it could work. Because right now you've got 2 guys in LaMelo and Terry that both need the ball a ton to be effective. Like Terry's not, somebody that can be away from the basketball all game and come away happy or effective. So, I think they can coexist. And I think that putting a ball-dominant scorer who can go and get his own shot, at least at the rim, would be a compliment to LaMelo Ball. I mean, we've been asking LaMelo to drive more and to get fouled more, and we're asking him to do that because, one, we think it would make him an all-NBA level player, but also there just aren't a ton of guys on this roster that can do that, and so to have him do that would be pretty exceptional. But if you add Scoot, then you ask him to do that a little less, honestly, and that may, every time you drive, it's an opportunity to hurt that ankle. So it may extend LaMelo Ball's career if you put him alongside Scoot. So I think there actually would be a lot of advantages to pairing those 2 together. And for, as I mentioned in the interview, for Scoot's part, he seems open to this sort of Dame Lillard, CJ McCollum setup where you've got 2 2-star guards leading the way.
Yeah, love ball handlers on the court. Love it. I love the fact pairing Scoot Henderson with LaMelo, not only do I not think that is a weakness for LaMelo or vice versa, I think it's an absolute advantage. In fact, the only way I think it might be a weakness, I wonder if it affects Scoot's game just a little bit. Because if you're worried about the shot, then the idea is that LaMelo drives into the paint, kicks out, Scoot's open for 3. Maybe that doesn't capitalize on his game as much. But the exact opposite is true for LaMelo. Like, I think LaMelo is a star in the league that can play in a lot of different roles in the backcourt, right? Mm-hmm. Where, okay, defensively, that needs to improve for sure. He does need to improve his rim pressure. I'm not saying he's great at everything, but I think he can fit and acquiesce to anything that is needed of him, because if Scoot is driving in the paint and then kicks out, yeah, man, we'll have LaMelo shoot that 3 all day long. Mm-hmm. We know how bona fide of a shooter that he is. And those guys working where Scoot Henderson brings you some strengths where that might be a weakness for LaMelo, at least at this point in time. I love those guys on the same team. I think it's an advantage.
For sure. I mean, any amount of rim pressure that other guys can put on an opposing defense will just open LaMelo up to so many more three-point opportunities where he's proven that he can just be devastating. And he's been creating a lot of his own space just by virtue of him stepping out and going a little deeper, and defenders not really willing to go out and guard him there. But there's going to be so much more space if you've got a guy who can be as effective at the rim as Scoot can. Scoot's got to improve his shooting, but he's going to be more wide open if you've got LaMelo drawing attention away and distributing it out to him. That's going to be helpful to Scoot, who is 6'2", and I don't think you can discount that, because Scoot is not going to really be able to create a ton of space against really good defenders by himself because of that height discrepancy. He's gonna open up, or he's gonna get a reality check when he jumps into the NBA and he's going up against defenders who are 6'5" to 6'8" every single night, draping all over him. So it would benefit him, I think, a tremendous amount to play with somebody like LaMelo Ball that can give him just a little bit more space to operate offensively. Now, defensively, I think there's going to be just as many questions with Scoot Henderson there because of the height that there is with Terry Rozier, because of the, perceived lack of effort there defensively. So, they've got to figure that out. And who do they pair in terms of the forwards? And you've got Mark Williams, that's a start. But in terms of those forwards, what do you pair there to make up for the fact that your backcourt is still going to be pretty harmful defensively?
But Scoot is a linebacker, though. That'll help.
It's true. And the effort's there. The effort's there. I'm not like Scoot is. I mean, he's a bulldog when it comes to the defensive end of the floor. Like he's all over the place. That's not a question. But you're going to be able to shoot over Scoot.
That's the problem. I think the driving, it's going to be hard because if Scoot is going to beat you to the spot, he's going to have leverage. You're not going to move him as an offensive player. I have total faith that he's going to be strong enough to not get moved off of his spot. It's all about, can you shoot well over him? And even still, right? Like, it's not like Dennis Smith Jr., by the way, is a tall person. He's not a giant, So when we're talking about Scoot, who, yes, is shorter, we are still talking about somebody that is good defensively or has that capability, right? I think that can really help. And I love the compliments from both players, LaMelo and Scoot. I see it completely differently. With all respect to anybody that's worried about that, the LaMelo and Scoot pairing, I view it completely differently.
To dive into some Hornets history, as the Hornets historian here for Every Hornets Boxscore, the reason Muggsy worked on the defensive end of the floor was because those teams didn't rely on defense to win basketball games. They were very much a pace team and a little bit of a space team in an era where that wasn't extremely a popular way to play offensively. So they won games on offense, and maybe part of the reason why they didn't have as much success in the playoffs. But the other reason that Muggsy worked in those lineups is because behind him, he had a couple of monsters in LJ and Alonzo Mourning. And so, I mean, there were other guys too on the wing that, in those starting lineups that provided a lot of beef and defensive intensity and power. That's my question, if you're going to feature those kind of lineups in the backcourt with those kind of measurables, are you going to pair that with some intensity at the forward position and, some physicality from the center position? Can Mark Williams increase that? Because that would help, assuage some of those fears that you would have playing a guy like Scoot next to LaMelo.
Well, and real quickly, just some house cleaning here. DSJ is only listed at 6'2" on Basketball Reference. So, you can see if you have the athleticism, you have the dog in you, as you said. If the x-rays do indeed show pit bulls, then Scoot Henderson can maybe even bring that defensive prowess there. Last thing, just with Dennis Smith Jr., I'll ask you this because I was interested. He comes over. He is this reclamation project. It's a bright story. Nice surprise. Steve Clifford loves him. This reminds me, Doug, of one, the ability for Steve Clifford to get the most out of a lot of guards out there, right? Whether it be Kimba, whether it be DSJ. And it also reminds me of, how about Jeremy Lin? When he came back after he had a down career, leaves the Linsanity era, goes to Houston, doesn't perform well, comes to Charlotte, that gets him a big old contract during the salary spike. And then Jeremy Lin, can look back fondly on his days here in Charlotte. Very, minor, certainly to a lesser degree, but I do think he's the latest example of somebody that comes into a Steve Clifford system, revives his career, and now to me, and maybe you could also include Kelly Oubre here, depending on how much you value him. But this is someone that I think most fans covet as far as a free agent on the roster that you would want to bring back, right? So many times those free agents might leave to go to a different team and they're not re-signed, at least here recently, because they were focusing on rebuilding. They've been so young for so long. I feel like DSJ is one of those guys that the team kind of wants back and might come back as one of the more coveted free agents on the roster. Devontae Graham was traded as a free agent. Malik Monk left, and he wasn't even coveted, right? I don't even know how Devontae was either. I don't know. Just interesting. I didn't know your thoughts on anything I said when I throw a loose question at you.
Well, I think it's two guys meeting each other at the right moment. It's serendipitous. And I think those situations happen all the time in the NBA when a coach and a player get together and they just see eye to eye and they need each other in a way. And Clifford needed both what he offered defensively, but also, I mean, we haven't mentioned the fact that he was, I think, ranked 15th in the NBA in assist to turnover ratio and 14th in steal to turnover ratio.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like he was able to offer that too. He didn't make a lot of mistakes offensively, other than when he was shooting corner threes and missing them. Like that's the only mistake was that he couldn't shoot, but he didn't shoot a ton either. Like we didn't see any, unless he absolutely had to. He was in some lineups where it was like, look, if DSJ's not shooting, who is, right? So there were a couple of those games, but for the most part, when he was surrounded by a full deck, he understood, hey, I don't need to be as aggressive offensively. There are other guys available to do that. I'm going to play within the system here. And that's really what Clifford values. And DSJ wanted to be valued. What Clifford values is playing to your strengths. And so I'm sure these two guys got together and said, hey, look, I've watched your game, and I've seen that you have a lot left to give to an NBA team. And I feel like that's what he needed to hear. Dennis Smith Jr. wants to be believed in. He wants a team to really buy into him, just like Kelly Oubre. You just mentioned Kelly Oubre. Kelly Oubre, same thing. He wants a team to believe in him. That's what these guys, everybody, NBA players value different things. Some value money, some value status, some value whatever. I think there are a subset of guys in the NBA that value teams that say, hey, you're really good at basketball and you're good at these things, and we'd like you to do these things for us long term. I think that's what DSJ is looking for, and that's why I hope the Hornets commit to him.
Yeah, Steve Clifford, glows when he talks about DSJ too, about how elite of a defender he is, how much he likes him. So, DSJ certainly gets the approval of the head coach. I think most fans, given they understand his role, I think most fans give him the approval as well. So we'll see what happens this offseason. We'll have you covered as each of these updates come about. Coming up next, the next episode, it's SU's fee time. We will give you that player recap, but also we have some more draft talk, just in case you don't want to listen to 3 segments of Svi Mikhailuk talk. Understandable. We'll give you some more draft conversation with Rafael Barlow of the NBA Big Board Pod. We appreciate you making us your first listen. Now make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the league with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your pods. SU's feed tomorrow. We really appreciate your time.